Our next speaker is Delilah Panio. Delilah's Summit Talk is presented in partnership with TMX and the Toronto Stock Exchange. Delilah Panio is the Vice President of Capital Formation in the US for the Toronto Stock Exchange. She is a frequent speaker, mentor, pitch judge, and pitch coach. And she was also recently named in the 2019 Top 100 People in Finance magazine. Please welcome Delilah Panio.
Hello, good afternoon. What an honor to be here. So given what's happening in the markets today, this may be the worst timed presentation or the best timed presentation. Wow. It certainly speaks to what we say here at SheEO, which is everything is broken, and what an incredible opportunity. So I speak a lot about going public, mostly to rooms of men. So I'm going to talk about it a little differently today, if I have your permission. I'm a little nervous. I haven't talked this way about going public before. Exactly. This pink dress is going to help me get some courage. I don't usually wear colors, so this is another debut for me. A lot of color. So I'd like to start with a question, as we like to do. What if women fully accessed the public markets? What if we access the markets in a way that men have been doing for many, many, many years to fund their businesses, to grow their businesses? And again, in this time of the markets of who wants to go public, it's important because last year, $626 trillion was raised globally in the public markets. And very little of that went to women. So what can we do about that? So before I get to that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about me. I am very passionate about economic independence for women through entrepreneurship and through investing. I have a real MBA. I have an entrepreneurial MBA, which means I had a startup that did not work. Super expensive, but valuable MBA. I'm the co-founder of We Are Enough, which is a nonprofit that educates women globally on why and how to invest in women entrepreneurs or with a gender lens in the public market. I am proud to say I'm a 5-year SheEO activator. And I had the incredible honor of working with Vicky to bring SheEO to the US, to LA, when we first started the US campaign. I have 15 years in the capital markets. As you know, I currently work for the Toronto Stock Exchange, but I actually live in Los Angeles, which is a super sweet gig for a girl from Saskatchewan. But the most important thing on this slide is that little girl. And that little girl grew up in the 70s in Saskatchewan with a mom who was a woman behind the man. And she grew up thinking, I'm not doing that. I am not going to be that woman. And I have spent my life working with women and helping women get economic independence because my mom did not have a voice in that relationship. So let's talk about money in the public markets and why this matters. Seriously, who wants to take their company public right now? And as we're here celebrating entrepreneurs who are getting some of them their first external dollars and angel investors and follow-on funding, I know this is not on most entrepreneurs' mind. And it's actually not in the mind of most men either, to be honest, because of what's happening in capital markets. Let's take a look at why you don't want to go public. Let's start there. High cost, very expensive corporate governance, especially in the US. The time to run a public company, especially you're busy trying to run your business, is like having a second business. This insane pressure that has happened over the last couple of decades of the requirement of a quarterly ROI, which is really insane for most companies to achieve. The shrinking public markets, we actually have fewer public markets globally than we have had in many, many decades. And yet we have these huge mega IPOs that seem totally insane, like Uber and Lyft and whatever happened to WeWork. At the same time, we have this excess of private capital in the markets. So venture capital, private equity, you can get a higher valuation in the private markets than you can in the public markets. That also comes at a cost, and I personally think that we are living on a house of cards of the valuations in the private sector that is going to also crash very soon. The public company mindset of when you start your business, that saying, I'm going to build a long-term business that's going to be around for a long time, and I'm going to take it public. And there is an attitude that happens when you say that. If you're talking to investors or just anywhere, just saying, I'm going to build a really large, big company, and I'm going to take it public. It's an extraordinary mindset. And of course, the biggest reasons why a lot of us in the room and women entrepreneurs are not thinking about going public is there are very few women CEOs of public companies. Currently, the S&P 500, 6% of CEOs are women. Here in Canada, for TSX, 4% of our listed companies are women. So, again, why does this make sense? Why go public? Because for many, 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 many years and decades, it has been an extraordinary way to grow your business. And every entrepreneur needs to know all of their options for capital. And going public and accessing the public markets, that $626 trillion we're talking about, we're not accessing that. And we need to think about that and the opportunity to use the public markets as a growth tool. So here are the reasons why you should go public, that any company in any country should be thinking about of why would I look at this option for raising capital. So as you saw from the number, it is a very large pool of capital to access to grow your business. Acquisition currency. If you are building a business that would benefit from having public stock to buy other businesses, buy your competitors, buy technology, this is an extraordinary way to grow and accelerate the growth of your company. Attracting top talent. It's way more attractive to, if you're trying to get really great employees to join your company, to say, here's public stock options versus private paper that, as we're seeing, companies are not exiting. It's very hard to get top talent in private paper now. And there's the credibility, the exposure, the success of having gone through the process of going public. There's so much opportunity in that. And there's also a really important opportunity for all of us in the audience that we're missing out on lately because companies are not going public, which is that we as everyday people get to participate in the next great Canadian, American, Australian, New Zealand, British company by buying that stock and supporting that company and being part of the growth of that business. There's a huge opportunity there. And this is really important for us women, it's a pathway to liquidity for the founders of these companies, for us as investors, to fund what's next. Some of you may have heard of this, the PayPal Mafia. So these are 19 guys who were at PayPal, who were either founders, co-founders, or executive. In 2002, PayPal went public. And then 6 months later, eBay bought them. But they went public and they exited. And since then, these 19 men have built some of the largest technology companies in the world. YouTube, Square, Tesla, LinkedIn, my favorite, Kiva. These were all part of a startup, grew the business, used the public markets, exited, and went on to be prolific investors and innovators in so many ways. What if we had our own PayPal Mafia? And you know what's really interesting is that the trends for women are actually quite positive right now. There's a whole bunch of things on this slide, but I'm going to point out a couple of them. The S&P Global just in October released a study that they had done where they had tracked they tracked CEO appointments of public companies between 2002 and 2019. There were about 5,800 total CEOs, about 10% of those are women. They tracked the 2-year performance from the time that CEO started for 2 years, and overall, the women CEOs outperformed the men by 20%. That is massive. We have trends like Goldman Sachs. I mean, this is like the epitome of the patriarchal investment bank globally. They just came out at the World Economic Forum in January and said they will no longer support IPOs for companies with an all-male board. And this is something that they're not doing because they're feminists. They are doing it because when the CEO, he had the research done, tracked the IPOs in the last 4 years, the ones that had at least one woman, if not 2 women on their board, were significantly outperformed the other IPOs of all-male boards. WeWork had an all-male board. So we have trends. So on TSX, all of our TSX composite companies now have a woman on the board. California was the first state a couple years ago that requires public companies to have women on boards. And what's equally important in this whole scenario of going public is the investors. And the investors in this scenario are looking for women on the boards and women running companies. So gender lens investing, which we're hearing a lot about, and Suzanne Beagle is actually across the hall talking about that right now from London. There's a really important trend of institutional investors and retail investors which will drive who gets to go public. And they are looking at impact companies. They're looking at gender lens investing. So there are some really great trends that are boding well. And how interesting is this, that 2 of the largest markets in the world, the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, are currently run by women. This is positive. Let's talk about why it matters. Because in every category of raising capital, women get a very small percentage of that capital. And we can't afford to miss out on one of the biggest pools of capital that's out there. So how do we look at this? How do we do this differently? It's every woman entrepreneur in this room and every investor who's invested in one of those companies should be thinking about what are all of our options for capital. And the media does an incredible disservice of only talking about this, get your angel investor, get your venture capital, and then be sold. And that as a track for raising capital and growing your business really hardly works out for anybody. So it's important to know what your options are. Why it really matters, really, really, really matters, is the multiplier effect when women have money, which equals power, which equals changing the world. Whether it's more women entrepreneurs getting funded through the public markets, through the exits, through your return on investment because you've invested in those companies, impact entrepreneurship grows. The more women that are obviously CEOs of companies, and especially big public companies, or even smaller growth public companies, we change the workforce. We change the way that companies are run. We change the way HR policies are created. There's so many impacts that we know about when women have money and they're able to access the capital they need. So what can we do? Founders, please get educated on this as an option. So whether you're in Australia, the ASX, or if you're in London, AIM, in the US, here in Canada, we have an extraordinary 2-tier market, especially for earlier stage companies. If you're an investor, an angel investor in any portfolio company thinking about this, all of us as investors, we're all investors in our retirement funds and any direct investing. We can talk to our financial planners about gender lens investing. And we can say, I want to support those women CEO-led public companies. And I want to encourage other investors to be doing the same because the trend comes through the investors always. So imagine if a SheEO venture went public and 5,000 women bought that stock. I mean, that's our PayPal Mafia right there. And we exit those companies and we invest in more, and the perpetualness happens over and over again. So I'll leave it with this, and to be honest, I don't have the answers to this. I just know that I work in the capital markets. I see only men looking at going public or wanting to go public. And then I also see, which Vicky didn't tell, part of her story when she was taking her company public, where she, as the woman CEO, was asked to step aside for a man to become the CEO of that public company. There has to be a better way. And because we are literally in a time when the capital markets are totally broken, the investment banking model is totally broken, there is a huge opportunity here for us collectively to do something. So I would love to speak to anybody who wants to be part of this mission of mine, and hopefully we can all do this together. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Delilah, for shining the light on a massive opportunity for women-led businesses. Once again, we have some time for some Q&A, and so if you have a question for Delilah, you can raise your hand, and we'll make sure we get a microphone over to you. Oh, the hands are popping up.
This is the founder of We Are Enough, so she knows me well, so this is going to be interesting.
I'm going to be nice.
Tracy.
So I've asked a couple of women to go public on the TSX stock exchange, and I've heard over and over something that I've never heard a man say. I don't want to be the CEO of a public company. Literally like that. Not even like, I don't want to be, but it's like, I don't want to be. They're whining about it. And I don't want to say that's all women, but I keep hearing that. Yeah. Are you hearing that? And then what do you say back to them?
Well, what I see, because I'm at events speaking all the time, and we all see a lot of women pitching to get capital, and there's often a ceiling. And this concept of going public, it just doesn't come up. It's just not even in anyone's minds. Now, again, there's lots of reasons to not want to be public. But if you're building a business that is going to grow and has the opportunity to benefit from being public, it has to be something to be thought about. But yes, I mostly don't even encounter women in conversations about going public, which for me is the bigger concern. But I don't know how to shift that. I don't know how to change that, except that there has to be a way, and it's part about creating a new model around the public markets, starting with the investment banks, around how do we fund companies that are led by women that, again, we have to do it our own way. And that's like a huge challenge. I mean, it's going to be interesting.
Lila, you mentioned you had just right here.
Okay, sorry.
Hey. You mentioned you had a failed startup.
Yes.
What did you learn from that? And how did that impact you in where you are now?
So I'm glad that you brought this up, because actually there's a good little anecdote around this, around women investors. So I was at Toronto Stock Exchange for 10 years. I quit, went to get off the corporate ladder, moved to LA for obvious sunshine reasons. And I had a startup, and it was a digital media company of which I raised some friends and family money, and it was just really hard. I mean, I was a classic corporate MBA success gal who's like, how hard can this be to start a business? And I was the customer in the business, but I didn't understand the business. So I came from being in the capital markets and then was building a digital media company. But one thing, I learned a lot, especially about how hard it is, and I'm much more compassionate about entrepreneurship now. I really get how hard it is. But one actually interesting story, when I went to raise my friends and family round, I was just raising about $50,000 to get me started, and I came back to Toronto, and I met with all my friends and former colleagues at the exchange, equal number of men, equal number of women, and the men were just like, yeah, here's 20 grand, 5 grand, 10 grand. I've worked with you for 10 years. You're awesome, Dee. Like, I believe in you. Take the money. And I equally approached the same number of women who were all accredited investors, as I had been. And they all looked at me like I was absolutely insane, that I was asking them for money to invest in my company. And the minimum was $5,000 to invest. And if it had been a charity event, 5 grand table, no problem. But I was asking them to invest in me and my business, and they literally thought I was insane. And then I realized, okay, well, I'd been an accredited investor for several years. I've never even had this conversation with anybody. No one's ever asked me to invest. And then I find out that all the men, my colleagues, have been investing in their brother and their cousin, their friend, 5 grand here, 10 grand there, and no one had even, I had never had that conversation. And I'm in the capital markets. So there's a massive disconnect again about women talking about money and investing and supporting each other, which we do brilliantly in a million ways. But with our money, and this is why, and I'll end on this, and this is another question, but when I was an activator the first year of SheEO, I didn't know Vicky at the time. I was Canadian. Someone sent me a link. I didn't know what it was, but I was like, $1,000. I can invest in women entrepreneurs. Super cool. And I literally didn't check it out. I'm like, oh, it's Canadian. It can't be fraud. I'm sure it's fine. If it was American, I might have questioned it. I don't know. But it was coming from Canada, Toronto. I'm like, oh, it's got to be fine. But I literally, it's just, this is the best way, what we call the gateway drug to investing in women. But there are many other ways to invest in women entrepreneurs, including through the public markets and supporting women that way too.
Oh, and I think that's all the time we have for now. Once again, let's thank Delilah Panio for sharing your insights with us today.